Well, hello and welcome to a very special session that we're hosting here at Devex in a remarkable and dramatic moment in American history and world history. We're hosting this event for those of you who have very sadly lost your jobs at USAID. Some 95% of the team of people, professionals around the world who have worked at that historic agency, that agency that's done so much in this world, have learned just in the last days that their time there is over. It's come as a tremendous shock. And I just want to begin by acknowledging the deep respect and admiration that I have, that I know our panelists today have, that I know this whole community has for all of you, those of you who have worked at USAID, those of you who are working at other US government agencies that are affected, those of you who are working in the partner institutions that work with these agencies. This has been a moment unlike any other. We've called this event a career emergency because that's what it feels like. I know because I've been on the phone nonstop with many of you over these days that your first thought is for the programs and the people impacted on the ground, the people that you're meant to serve with your work. And that's right, and that's true. There have been children who are in line to get fed and aren't going to be fed, right? I understand the seriousness of that situation, and I know that's where you go first. But I do want to just take a moment to say, for all of you, for your work, that this is an incredibly difficult moment and that we want to acknowledge that, the pain, the anguish you're all going through, and to take a moment to say how much we admire the work that you have done and that you will continue to do as we get through this period. It's a particularly challenging moment because it's affecting everyone at once. And so it may feel like there's nowhere to turn. We do not have all the answers. I don't. I know this group doesn't, but we want to at least start to help reflect on these issues, give you somewhere to begin to get a toehold as you think through where you go from here and what you ought to do next. So with that, I'm really honored to be joined by an incredible group of leaders who wanted to take the time to be here with all of you and wanted to take the time to hear from you and answer your questions. We've got a chat window. You're very welcome to tell us who you are, where you're coming from, share any comments or thoughts you've got. And then we have a Q&A box, and put in your questions there. This is a very large group. We'll do our best to get to some of them. I'll try to weave them into the conversation that we have. And I just really appreciate each of you individually for the work you've done and for being here. With that, I just want to ask a really special participant today, Gayle Smith, who you all know, many of you work with her side by side. She led the U.S. Agency for International Development. She worked in multiple presidential administrations. She ran the One campaign. She herself worked on the ground as a relief worker and a reporter for many years early in her career. And I just wanted her to give us her thoughts and reflections as we get started today. Gayle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Raj, and thank you to Devex for pulling this together. Look, to everyone, I mean this most sincerely. I could not be more proud than to have served as the administrator of USAID, but I know that anything I achieved there, anything I achieved at the White House when I had the brief for development at the NSC, was the result of the work that you all do. And I mean that absolutely sincerely. Political appointees are just that. You are and have been the backbone, the institutional memory. I cannot tell you how much I learned, how many times you set me straight, and how proud and honored I am to have served with you. I think for all of us, we share your anger, your outrage, your pain, your shock. We all know how important this work is. We all know how much dedication, time, expertise, knowledge you put into it. And we know what it yields for the country and for our communities. And I think what we want to do with this exercise is really two things. One is to make sure that you know that, as Raj has said, that you have our undying respect, our gratitude, our solidarity. We do not want you to feel like you're in this alone. All of us in this space are here as a community. And then second, to do what we can to, as Raj says, help our community through an absolutely catastrophic period. So this will not be all of the answers. I think what we collectively hope we can do is sort of set the frame. And as Raj says, help you even begin to get a handle of how do we proceed going forward. And while this is big for each of you, those of you who have suddenly seen your jobs evaporate, this is big for all of us. So our commitment is to you and with you, and I really want to give you my word, it's sustained. This isn't a one-off. We will be with you all the way through this. So let me just, Raj, pass it back to you, but reiterate one thing. When I left the Obama administration and USAID, I said to the team, and I meant it then and I meant it now, the single greatest thing for me in that entire experience was working with all of you.
Thank you so much, Gail. I know that meant a lot to everybody who's part of this call today. Fatema, Sumar, can I go to you? You, like Gail, have served in many roles. You were at the State Department. You were at the Millennium Challenge Corporation across, Republican and Democratic administrations. You now lead Harvard Center for International Development. I'd love to just get your initial thoughts for people in terms of what they ought to go and do.
Well, first, I just want to say, Raj, and to the whole Devex team, thank you for showing us what community looks like when we most need it. So I really appreciate the space. We're seeing the chat. Thank you for keep sharing the love, sharing your name, sharing. Each of you are such a light behind this journey, and we see you. So the first thing I just want to say collectively from all of us in the space, we see you. You are not alone. We feel for you, and we're here for you. Let me talk a little bit, Raj, about I'm someone that is a very odd duck in development and foreign policy, and I've jumped all around both US government, but civil society, between NGOs and academia. What I wanted to share with all of you is as you're thinking through these moments of heartbreaking transition that's been imposed upon you, not by choice. And we appreciate the trauma of that moment. And some of this is just going to be figuring out your own personal lives, your personal trauma as you sort that through. And we appreciate that's going to take some time. As you get ready to think through the professional transitions of what that could look like, there are spaces that want your talent. And I don't want you to feel that even while the US government is at this moment of unprecedented crisis, that there is no space for you in the broader sector. The sector needs you more than ever. The sector is changing faster than ever. And it's going to change beyond just the traditional ways we have thought about international development. The private sector is going to be forced to change to pick up some of this incredible gap. Philanthropy is going to have to change. Other governments are going to be having to step in, even if they don't want to, because there's going to be crises all around the world that somebody has to solve for. So even through this moment of crisis, even this moment of pain and trauma, there are going to be spaces, both in the traditional ways we think about development today, but new spaces and entrepreneurial spaces that are going to be emerging quickly tomorrow that need your talents. And part of the journey and part of the things that we want to share with you today, but an ongoing conversation, is how to get ready for that transition, how to get ready for that journey. Some of you, it'll be easier than others because you may feel more prepared. For others that have only had a career within one sector, one agency, one space, we have ways that we can support as well. So we also acknowledge that you're in different parts of that transition, maybe as for your families and thinking through your kids or loved ones, maybe in your own professional journey. We know it's not one size fits all, but I do want to say, as someone that's made multiple transitions in my own career across different sectors, skills are transferable, your talents are transferable, and you have a lot to offer. And we want to make sure that we give you a vocabulary and a toolkit that helps you translate those skills to other places and sectors so they can be seen. So Raj, let me pause there.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And I want to make sure throughout the conversation, we'll come back to some of those themes. How do you think about transferring your skills, and what is the future of this space, the social impact space more broadly? Joel Hellman, so thrilled you could be with us, and I'd love to get your perspectives. You're, of course, the Dean at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. You had a 25-year career at the World Bank, rising to pretty senior level there. You know the multilateral development bank space really well. Of course, being at the School of Foreign Service, the Foreign Service really well. Just love your overall thoughts right now for people.
Well, thank you very much, Raj, again, and to Devex for putting this together. And of course, I echo the sentiments that Gayle and Fatema so eloquently stated, which is this is an extraordinary global community. Just watching the webinar chat and sort of seeing this truly global community of people who dedicated their lives, their career, or beginning to dedicate their lives and career, many who spend decades doing this. It is such an extraordinary community and one that must be preserved. And I think that's got to be our highest priority is to how to make sure that we get the best out of this group and that this group can continue their work and their commitment. A couple of things about what we're seeing at the moment. I think first and foremost is it is really important to suggest that as extreme as these measures are, these executive orders are, they are executive orders. They're not law. And they are going to be challenged. They are being challenged. And there's still quite a long way to go before we see what the implementation is going to be. That doesn't make life any easier for those of you who've gotten furlough notices or who are starting to think about how to pack up families and move them back home from abroad in 30 days. But I think there's still a long road ahead before we see what the true implication of these executive orders are. And I think it's important to recognize that because it also means that action is still possible. And you should know that there are many who are acting to support this community. So I think there's still a long road ahead. Second, when I see the extraordinary community that the webinar chat is showing, I hope we don't forget the power of the collective. One of the things that is a response to what's going on here is that everyone is so shell-shocked that to some extent we are kind of cowering against the onslaught of actions and rhetoric, dehumanizing and belittling rhetoric. But there's power in the collective, and I think we need to ensure how we maximize the power of that collective to ensure that the next steps are ones that demonstrate the power of this community, demonstrate the commitment of this community, and demonstrate what this community has to offer. So I think that we really shouldn't shy away from the collective effort of response to this. Now, of course, beyond the collective effort, each and every one of us has to decide what you are going to do in response to these measures and how you're going to handle the radical sort of shift that some of you are facing. And as Fatema already began to mention, and I think we'll talk more deeply in the questions to come, I think there is a lot that one can do in this, what I assume is an interregnum. This is not a permanent institutional structural sort of shift. This is an interregnum. It may be a 2-year interregnum, it may be a 4-year interregnum, but it's an interregnum. And if it's an interregnum, that means what do I do in the next few years to make the most of this time? And I think there are opportunities for retooling, opportunities for skills development, opportunity for reevaluating the path that you're going on to still maintain your commitment to serving the greater good, as you all have been doing, but doing it perhaps through different institutions, through different fora, through different career paths. I think the private sector, the multilateral sector, the state and local level in the United States, there are many different pathways. And I can tell you at Georgetown, we are already working with our students to really expand their career horizons and think about what do I need to invest in order to take advantage of those new career horizons and what are the options that those horizons put forth. And I hope that's what we're going to get to in the questions.
Yeah, that's great, Joel. I really appreciate that. And just to echo your point, you've been hearing all of you on this call that your work hasn't had impact, that there's been fraud and criminality and all kinds of awful things have been thrown out there without any factual basis. Of course, at Devex, our reporters are out there chasing down the reality and publishing that. And the reality, but hopefully being together helps you realize that your work has had a real impact and that we know and that a lot of this demonization is not real. I want to bring in Zaid. Zaid, you've done something not everybody has done before. Zaid is at Cloudfare, a huge private sector technology company where you lead their public policy function. You were at USAID. You were in the general counsel's office. You also worked in the White House. You've had an incredible career both in government and now in the private sector. And of course, a lot of people are thinking about that. I'm already seeing questions and comments about what about the private sector? So I want your overall take, but feel free to start us down that road too, if you'd like. Thanks, Zaid.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Raj. Well, first, I want to say thank you all for your service and your dedication and your work for international development. It's hugely important When I was at the agency, I was there in 2014, 2015. I could feel the love and the dedication that you all had for your work in a way that I hadn't seen in other places I've been. So I just want to say thank you for that. Fatima mentioned skills and thinking about your skills and how they're transferable. That's something that can be really hard. It was hard for me as I, really after the Obama administration ended and was looking for a job, had to really think about what my skills were, what I had to offer. It was really the first time I had to search for a job. And so I had to think, I've been working for years, but if I had to put down on paper, if I had to give somebody an elevator pitch, what would I say? I mean, essentially my job was to get shit done. But that's not something you can put on a resume. You've got to figure out, like, my job is to, have the trains run on time. You got to figure out how to put that down on paper so that people understand that you are someone, and a lot of us are this, like, particularly generalists. Somebody throws you into a situation and you have to figure out how to make it work. You got to figure out how to get that medicine. You've got to figure out how to get these houses built, et cetera. And it's really hard sometimes to get that down on paper. So figuring out and thinking about your skills, I think is important. I think you also have to think very broadly and comprehensively about your skills and how they might be transferable, and think outside the box, and think about how or where you can take what you've learned over the course of your career to someplace different, someplace you maybe have never thought about working before. I also, I think it's really important to create a briefing book for yourself. What are your wins? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are some of the things you've done over the course of your career that's hard to remember that you worked on? I think it's good to write them down, do a draft Q&A so that you're ready to answer questions. So you think about all the different things you've done over your career. I think is a good place to start. And then I also think it's really important to have a buddy to keep you accountable for this period, right? Like, it's very easy for us, particularly in a remote work world, for us to stay in our basement and not see people and feel like we are a failure because we don't have a job, whereas that is absolutely not the case. And I think it's even more important for us to have community and to have that buddy who's like, okay, what did you do today? Did you contact this employer? Did you work on your resume? Did you work on your LinkedIn profile? If you have that person or that group of people to help keep you accountable, I think that you'll see that it'll make sure that you are doing something rather than trying to not think about the situation that we find ourselves in. And then maybe give yourselves daily, weekly, or monthly benchmarks. And if you haven't hit a certain benchmark by this date, then move on to something else. Because I was political appointee, I knew the last day of my job was going to be January 20th, 2017. It was very different than, I think, the situations you find yourselves in. I still was unprepared for what that meant. I didn't have a job for 7 months, and there was a part of me, like, I almost didn't go to my college reunion because I didn't have a job. And everyone at your 25th reunion talks about all the wonderful things that they were doing, and instead I went to my reunion and I talked about my amazing experience in the Obama administration and told people that I was looking for a job. And so I think that you own it. And again, this is not because of anything that you all did. And you have to put yourself out there, and you have to make sure that you don't retrench. I just want one last thing I want to say. Miles Sedgwick, I don't know if any of you all know him, but he's the president and director of content at Rana Labs, LLC. That's a company here in DC. He's got a long career in international development. He has put on his LinkedIn profile. You can go search. Anybody in DC who needs headshots, he will do them for free. Stop by his shop. He also has said if people want to come by and chat, he's open to those conversations. So look him up, and hopefully, if you guys need headshots or need some advice, then he can help out.
That's great, and that's such a good symbol of the kind of community that we're hoping to build here. I really appreciate you saying that, Zaid, and thanks for those really practical, useful thoughts. Scott Beale, I want to get you in the discussion. You led operations at the Peace Corps, but one of the things that's really interesting about your career is you were at the State Department, but you then became an entrepreneur in this space. You started Atlas Corps. You helped hundreds of people, I don't know, maybe thousands of people get a career in this space. So you know this as an entrepreneur, you've worked with lots of people who want to get into this kind of work. Would love to get your thoughts and reflections.
Thank you, Raj and Devex, for the opportunity to show up and be here and support this community. As the other panelists have said, I also just want to echo my appreciation to those on the call. I think all of us know when going into international development, it's a thankless job. No one goes into it for awards or pats on the back, but I don't think anyone could expect the situation that you are all in right now and don't deserve to be in. As Raj said, my name is Scott, and I've never worked at USAID, but for decades I've worked with the agency for my time at State and Peace Corps and the White House, and have worked so much respect for the agency and really for so many of you. But I guess one thing I did want to bring to this call is that perspective of an entrepreneur. I left State Department about 20 years ago with an idea to start an organization to meet a need that I didn't think was being met. And I thought for sure someone else was addressing it and that someone else was going to do it. And then I realized that I was in a space at a time in my life where I could try to address it myself. That's not the space that everyone's in at their time of their lives. It's not the entrepreneurial path is not necessarily for everyone, but it may be for more people than realize. That may not have been the career path that you wrote for yourself, but it may be the opportunity that's presenting itself. And there are a lot of resources out there for folks who do want to start organizations, who do want to start companies, who want to start social enterprises. There's a robust infrastructure out there. It's not easy, but there's a robust infrastructure out there for people who really want to do it. I spent about half my career overseas through, again, State or Peace Corps or through my family as well. I've been evacuated from an embassy myself. I'm actually currently overseas and have spent time with USAID officers this week. I know how it is not only affecting people professionally, but kids are being pulled out of school, the work that's being stopped. I just know how difficult it is. So my heart really goes out for everyone who's here. And while we don't know what's around the corner, we don't really know exactly what is coming. I do want to share that you are in a good, you are ready for what's next. Again, you didn't imagine this happening, but you have the education, you have the background, you have the skills to take it to a new sector, certainly to go to the nonprofit sector or to stay in government. That would be wonderful. But those two sectors don't have a monopoly on social impact in the world. And being an entrepreneur working in the private sector, there are a lot of ways to make an impact, whether you're earlier in your career or later in your career. And you have those skills. So I want you to be confident even as you face the uncertainty. And the second piece I just really want to emphasize, and other folks have said this, but I just really want to emphasize, is there are folks out there who are willing to help. There are resources, there are communities, there are people who are literally saying, how can I help? And what you need to know, though, as a person who has spent their career helping others, that you need to be willing to both ask and receive support when you may be in a time of need. Whether you're earlier in your career or later, whether you thought you'd be here or not, even if there's other people who might need more help than you do, it is okay to ask for help because you are giving someone the opportunity to be helpful and people want to support you, whether it's looking at your resume or doing a headshot or providing a home for you or helping take care of your kids for a few months so they can stay in school overseas. You would be surprised what people are willing to offer, but you often need to seek it out and you need to ask. In worst case scenario, someone may not be able to help, but that's okay. You were no worse off than you were before you asked. So, when I was evacuated from Cuba, so many people opened up their support for me. I'm trying to, on my LinkedIn profile, curate resources for others. You've got to seek it out. So be confident in the face of uncertainty, be willing to ask for help, get a partner like Zaid said, that's a brilliant suggestion, and know that we can, you can face these challenges.
Thank you so much, Scott. Really excellent practical advice. And you're so right, people. You got to ask, right? And you got to ask without any sense of shame. You did not land in this situation through anything that happened that you did. This happened to you and to many, many thousands of others. Kate Warren is with me, my colleague for so many years at Devex. Kate is our executive vice president and executive editor. And a lot of you know her because she's been behind the power behind a lot of our career content over the years and started her career herself as a recruiter on USAID projects. So you know this world really well. Kate, I would really love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. And it's both heartwarming and heartbreaking to see so many names in the chat here of people we've known in our community the past couple of decades. So really appreciate you all joining us. I think this feels like a existential crisis for many, in many ways. And I think it's because if you work in this space, it's not just a job. For many, it's a calling, it's a passion. It's not just impacting your professional identity, it's impacting your personal identity. And I think that's why there's such deep kind of trauma and shock right now. Everyone's trying to process that's maybe at a deeper level than other careers might experience in something like this. Over the years, we've been giving so much advice that people that wanted to transition into a global development career. So I've been thinking about that, and I think a lot of the other panelists have shared some really good tactics and advice around career transition. So going back and looking at our advice and kind of reverse engineering it, but just, simply, I mean, there's kind of like 4 steps we always recommend. It's, understanding the employer landscape and what kind of positions they have, mapping your skills and experience to those jobs, then rounding out any missing skills and experiences. And I think, as Joel and others have said, this is now a good time to think about skill building, and maybe positioning yourself to do a pivot, and then translating that experience. Fatema mentioned this very well, as around it's the terminology and the language you use. Being able to think about how do you talk about your experience in a way that will resonate with maybe a different context. I also think that, we've been seeing the development shift. Fatema, you mentioned this too. And this is a little bit of like a rip the Band-Aid, right? I think some of these changes were happening. We didn't expect so fast all at once, but they're happening. And I think this community is up to the challenge of figuring that out. The need is still there, as everyone said. The private sector for decades has benefited from foreign aid and really building the economies of their customer base, the supply chains, the employees. They still are going to need that. So they're probably going to figure out a way. We mentioned philanthropy. We are, USAID is such a linchpin of the development community, but there are plenty of other institutions doing work. You go on the Devex job board, there's plenty of other organizations hiring and doing this. So it's not all gone. And just wanting to reassure you that there are still those opportunities. And I think in moments of crisis is when real innovation happens. And I'm sure many of you are thinking about new ways of being able to tackle these problems. Scott, you mentioned, entrepreneurship, and, be interesting to see in a couple of years what some of you probably on this call end up doing and thinking about and pivoting, because again, the needs are still there. You all know what needs to be done. So it's just figuring out what is the right model and place to be able to do that work.
So maybe, thank you so much, Kate, for that. And maybe we could just go a little rapid fire here because we've got dozens of questions. I know we can't get them all. I'm going to kind of bunch a few together here into this one idea that many of you have mentioned, and that is like skill transferability. So what are the skills that you think people have coming out of this space? There's a lot of different roles, of course, in international development, but what are the kinds of skills and what might they be applicable to? And, how do you make that translation work? We even had somebody saying, well, are people going to see my resume and see USAID and think that's actually a negative? Like, what is the narrative? Zaid, you started to talk about the language, but so help people understand this issue, the skills they've got, what are they? And where might they be useful? Anybody want to quickly jump in on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So I think project management is something that's really important, and a lot of places, private sector, state government, et cetera, they look for project managers. And you might be running a project at an international level, but that can also be done in a number of other places. And not everyone is sort of equipped to run a team, to run a project, to run a budget. So, but also like, do you have experience with a budget, with, spending money, with, like sort of financial experience? Like that is something that obviously is transferable as well. I think one of the things with how you talk about your experience is to make sure that what you say about your experience is accessible to a wider community. As I was saying on our prep call, like probably everyone on this call knows what the interagency is, but if that is on your resume and you are looking outside of the US government or outside of the Washington corridor, like people don't know what that means. So you've got to translate interagency into something like cross-functional. So, you have to, maybe it's helpful to sit with somebody who doesn't work in this space and talk to them and have them give you some feedback on like, what do you mean by that? And they can help you to translate some of your skills into somebody outside of this space will understand better.
Thanks,
Can
Zaid.
I come
Others?
in?
Fatema.
Can I come in really fast? So I think about this literally every day up here at Harvard CID. Here are a couple buckets that I think you guys could think about. So yes, project management is number one. Actually, Zaid, that's funny. That's where my brain went to. So project management. Second is budget finance. Many of you run budgets that are larger than companies, in some cases countries. So you have incredible finance and budget skills. The third is a big one, is event coordination and logistics. So many of you who have planned visits, who have planned events, who have planned all those things, a lot of companies, a lot of universities, a lot of spaces need people who know how to execute logistics, events, coordination, those types of functions. The fourth is writing and comms, so communications. That can be both traditional writing. I'd stay a little away from the memo writing, interagency, US government type of writing, which is less relevant. And I'd focus more on the type of ways that you can do writing for different kind of audiences, including social media and other types of communication styles that are increasingly valuable. Writing can include synthesis of different ideas for different audiences. The fifth is procurement. Many of you are involved in very complex supply chain, procurement side. That is a skill that every single company in the world needs, every university, every NGO, state, local governments, others as well. And then the last I was going to emphasize here is policy analysis, whether that's going into like strategic foreign policy analysis, political risk. But those types of, you are all development diplomats, something very passionate to me. You all have such an innate understanding of political economy, understanding politics, regional dynamics in a way that most people like you can't even train for. You guys are experts at that, and that is something private sector companies, governments, and many others very, very much value. So don't underestimate those skills.
Anyone else on this team?
I'll add one really quick one. Managing people as well, which pretty much every nonprofit in business needs, and often people aren't very good at, and managing diverse teams, towards a mission-driven goal. One of the things you're probably not good at is applying for a job because you weren't expecting to apply for a job. So many U.S. government people don't even have LinkedIn profiles, so you do need to bone up on that skill. But your ability to apply for a job should not. You can learn that. You can learn that pretty quickly, and to be able to articulate what the skills you do have.
Raj, can I just add, first of all, these were all excellent suggestions about skills transferability. I also want to put in a plug for skills development in this period, because this is going to be a rough period on so many fronts, right? The development front and many other fronts. And so this is really, I think, a time, especially for the younger members of the audience, but almost at any level, to think about what skills do you want to build further into your career, and in order to help you for potential pivots or to deal with what's to come. And there is now an extraordinary network of schools across the world, because this is such an extraordinary international community. The Association for Professional Schools of International Affairs has schools on every continent. They are offering 1 year, short courses, longer courses. They're doing things hybrid, online. We at Georgetown are doing things in Indonesia and Qatar, as well as in the US. So there are lots of opportunities wherever you are, either to in-person engage and into skills building, in deepening your skills in different forms of international engagement, or to shift out into other forms of business skills, for example, or other things that you think can add on to the skills that you already have. So I do think this is going to be a rough period, and I think we all know that in the next 1 to 2 years, especially because of the sheer numbers of people who are going to be out looking for those jobs. So if you have the ability, looking at the various different options for thinking about skills development is something that is a good opportunity in this really difficult environment. I put in a link in the chat for the website for the Schools of International Affairs to have a look, see what's closer to you, and what programs are available.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Joel. And I do want to mention to everyone, because I've seen some comments in the chat, we are, of course, going to make this entire recording available to our community free of charge. We're going to write this up and grab a lot of the ideas that are in the comments and the questions that you're hearing from our panelists, get those out. Those will be the source of content we're producing totally for free for this audience. So I just want you to know there's a lot coming. I know many of you are furiously taking notes, which you should do, but there's a lot more coming after this. This is just the start. I do want to say also, if you have sectoral experience, a lot of these sectors and the work in those sectors is going to continue. So if you're in global health, global health work and challenges, it's going to continue. It's not maybe going to be centered around the US government anymore, but that work will continue. It'll be hard to get a job because there's so many people who are looking right now, but those real skills in that sector will matter. They will be seen and be seen as valuable by other players, private sector players, multilateral development banks, and others. If you're in agriculture, those skills are going to continue to be needed, right? So you can take this along the line, whether you've got skills relevant to climate, et cetera, even though this is going to be an enormous shock and a lot of people will be looking for a job at the same moment, ultimately the needs aren't going anywhere. So the work will have to continue in some kind of new form. Maybe this is a way to get us into another theme I'm seeing in the questions, which is, so where do we go from here? Maybe this is a little bit of a pause and then there's something new that comes later out of the US government, maybe not. That's kind of a debate. But what does this sector look like over time? So if you're trying to plan out your career, how do you target where it's going? If you still want to work on these same kinds of issues and you don't want to transfer to, let's say, domestic work here in the United States, what does it look like? Anybody have a thought? I mean, I can jump in as people are thinking. I think, oh, go ahead, Fatema.
Oh, no, I didn't want to cut you off, but I do think there's transitions happening right now. And Kate, you said this really well. They were happening before this, but now that entire timeline has been thrown out the window and it's been accelerated. And, we don't know, Joel, you said this really well. We don't know yet what the real future is going to be with USAID and other agencies that might be coming. And of course, the stop work orders for all the contractors and implementing partners. And we know we have people on this chat here beyond that are working in NGOs and implementing agencies as well that are affected and furloughed. So I think the dust is going to take some time to settle. But what is happening, I think, is an accelerated transition to different parts of the global community that you can take advantage of. So more concretely, what do I mean by that? There are going to, by force, because crises aren't going to go away and economic development and development needs aren't going to go away just because Washington says so. You're going to see African Development Bank. I think you're going to see the World Bank. I think you're going to see the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and others, the multilateral spaces, regional bodies, including in ASEAN and other spaces, starting to think through what does this mean for them. For 80 years post-Bretton Woods, the US, Europe, and others have set that narrative, set the funding architecture, set the governance mechanisms. In a way, those shifts are already happening and they're accelerated. So I do think, Raj, in terms of where the sector is heading, I do see that there could be new opportunities over time. This is not going to be a tomorrow moment. We know that. It's going to take some time for the dust to settle. But there could be opportunities, even if you're overseas right now, for instance, and you have cultivated good relationships with national governments, with local NGOs and other partners, there may be ways that you can transfer or help in consulting maybe in the short term or other opportunities to help those governments step up in this moment. I just got off a call right before this talking to representatives from the BRICS to talk about what South-South cooperation should be looking like in light of what's happening here in Washington, D.C. India's looking at this, China's looking at this, Australia's looking at this, and seeing ways, do they need to adapt, do they need to change? So just to say, I think there's going to be more opportunities in Africa, in Asia, and certainly in the Middle East. And I don't want to the Middle East, there's a lot happening and thinking in Dubai, in Saudi, and other places about how governments and other countries and philanthropists are going to need to step up into some of those spaces. We can get ready to take advantage of some of that to highlight our top talent when people come knocking about who can help in some of those transitions.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's good to remember that most of the people in the USAID ecosystem are not Americans. They're not being told to come back to the United States. The vast majority are people who are working in their own country or their own region. And of course, this is enormously destabilizing for people at the professional level, all the way down to people doing administrative work, drivers, and everything else who are losing their jobs right now. But the work and the needs in those communities continues. The sources of funding, the business models are going to change, but the work is going to need to continue in some way. Gayle, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. And I think that there's a real contribution to be made there. And a lot of those regions, I think there are going to be opportunities for people from those regions. I would just like to suggest to people, and I know it's hard to think about, don't rule out, for those of you who will be in the States, working in the United States and working outside of Washington. There's going to be pressure there because things that are happening in the economy, there may well be some of the same pressures in terms of cuts and funding. But if you look at what's being done, former USAID political appointee Tony Pippa is doing an extraordinary project at Brookings that's reimagining rural development in agriculture in the United States, taking the lessons of what USAID's done around the world. And so I think there are also opportunities to think about, and as Fatema and others were listing your skills, you have tremendous skills to bring to this space. And it's still, in many ways, it's global development happening across the country. So again, we can look at ways we can knit those contacts together and maybe liaise with some of our counterparts that work in the domestic area. But I wouldn't rule that out. I think that could be an area where your skills and expertise could be enormously helpful.
Raj, can I follow up on this and something that Fatima and Gayle both pointed out? This is a void, and it's going to create a void of true need, and we know that there are going to be other actors that seek to fill that void, and you should take advantage of that. There are numerous new players that are increasing their engagement on international development. There are new institutions, the BRICS Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, as well as the regional development banks, that are going to take advantage of the disengagement of America on aid issues. And they will be looking for people, especially your international staff who are in so many countries. Bilateral players playing so much of a greater role, whether it's India, Turkey, Brazil, and others. And I think that creates opportunities. And I think for Americans in particular, but also for USAID staff, to think more about the multilateral sector, how the multilateral sector is going to respond to the void, is an opportunity for you to rethink how your career path might look.
Yeah, I think that one of the areas to consider too is philanthropy. We haven't talked as much about that, but you're likely to see, you haven't seen it yet, but I think you're likely to see philanthropy begin to step up in a much bigger way over the next year or 2 or 3. And the kinds of work they're going to fund, the way they operate is quite different from US government and other government agencies. So it's not such a simple transfer as you might think of your skill set from one to the other. It's a lot like what we've been hearing from our panelists here about moving to the private sector. It's a different language, it's a different culture, but there still is the same kind of technical skills that are needed there. And so that's another area I'd throw out to look at. We've had a lot of the themes we're talking about really relate to mid and senior level people. I do want to take a moment just for people who are earlier in their careers. Some have just graduated and gotten their first role in international development. What is your thought for them as they look ahead? They got 20 or 30 years of work ahead of them. What should they be thinking about right now? Anybody want to jump in on that?
This one sort of
Kate, go ahead, Kate.
Go ahead, Kate.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, I feel like we have just accelerated a lot of the changes that are happening. And if you're a recent graduate, this is probably something that you were thinking about is what does the development and aid industry look like in 10, 20 years? And it would be very different from today. That now might be this year or next year. But, Gayle, your point of looking domestically, there has been this push of doing more aid work locally, led by local people. And the role of the American coming in was already becoming less important. So when you do think about working domestically, it really is that is localization, right? Working in the communities that you're in and you understand best. So thinking about how you can still work on those issues, but maybe in the US context, as Gayle said. or just being able to think about there are going to be these new ways and models. And when you're still early career, you have the benefit of not having this 2 decades of very specific experience. Maybe somebody can't quite see how you're going to pivot or transition. When you're still early, you still have a lot of room to grow and change and mold yourself. So I think you're probably in maybe even a easier position than folks who have been doing this for a couple of decades and now trying to make the change. Again, I think these are things that are happening anyway. And so, it's probably, and I mean, I'm not saying this is, if we were looking for any silver linings, is that you're able to make those adjustments and, pivots now.
Scott, I think you wanted to jump in on this.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that particularly for folks who are earlier in your career, your resume, your education, your experience may actually be more flexible than your imagination. What I mean by that is, like, especially someone who's been so driven to get into this competitive career that's so mission driven, that you have one, like some of you have one definition of what success is. Success is making a difference in the world in this job, at this agency, in this region of the world. But really, you have a lot of skills and experience and background and a lot of ways that you can make a difference, whether it's back in your home state or in a different region, whether it's overseas or in DC, whether it's both over the next few years. And so I think part of it's opening the aperture, like expanding what you think is possible, because you likely have the skills and experience and ability and network and tools to be successful in many different paths. So I think you need to open yourself up to what paths are available, and have a wider definition of what success looks like, to be able to really take the next step, because it's hard. It's hard. Like, you've worked so hard to be where you're at, and you are now forcibly, basically, not being allowed to stay on that path at no fault of your own. And that sucks. But it is not the only path towards a career, towards impact, towards a meaningful, successful life.
Yeah, I just want to add as we maybe think. Oh, go ahead, Joel.
Oh, I think that was me, but I don't know if Joel was also going to say something. I was
That
going to
was you,
say
Zaid. Go for it.
maybe Joel could jump in here if I mean, obviously, being the dean at Georgetown, but and I saw somebody write this in the chat, but I just wanted to, sort of emphasize it as well, is to use your university's career offices. So, and not just your undergrad. If you have a graduate degree, go back to the career offices for, if you have a law degree, go back to your law school office. A lot of them have counselors. Some of them have people who are there specifically to talk to alumni. And so use those resources and figure out what they offer, what they have, what they can do for you. And what opportunities they may have. There may be graduates, who have raised their hand and have already said, I'm willing to talk to people. And so it's not like you're cold calling, other folks from your university, but they may be able to put you into contact with people who have already said, I'm willing to talk to people. The other thing that I was going to mention is that I have not paid a lot of attention in this space, but one of the things that has happened recently on the political appointee front is that a lot of universities and think tanks, et cetera, have been raising money specifically to hire people who are out of jobs because they worked in the administration. And there may be a movement as well for the international development community for people to do a year fellowship where you write, where you research, et cetera, while you are looking for your next thing. So think about that. Keep an eye out for something like that, or maybe even contact some of the think tanks in DC, or your university, to find out whether or not they have a pot of money that's available for a year-long fellowship so that you can pay your mortgage and feed your kids and pay for childcare while you're also looking for a job and doing other things.
I just want to add one more thought here, which is, if we're moving from an era that was dominated by grants and contracts to one where the development finance institutions, the multilateral development banks, the private sector is going to play a bigger role, there's going to be more and more need for the kind of financial skills that many of you have in this community. And so highlighting those, showing that you can play in this new era where companies, investors, agencies like the World Bank need to work together to address a health systems challenge or an agriculture challenge, that's really important too. if you just assume and put down on your resume or in your narrative that you've managed a lot of projects, it might not highlight the fact that you know how to manage or engage in the kinds of activities that are going to be most important now in this new era where a lot of the energy is going. So I want to just throw that out there as well. In addition to the fact that things are moving really fast with technology and tech-enabled solutions, you all probably have more skills in this than you yourself realize, but you need to highlight those, show those to people in the narrative that you describe about yourself and in your bio and your resume and everything else you're putting out there. Show that you're not somebody who has been doing things the way they were done 20 years ago, but that you're very much keeping up with the times. We've
I'll
got
just
lots of
there
other
too,
questions,
Raj.
but go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, quick. I've seen a lot of comments around people with monitoring evaluation background, and I think that same applies in that being able, you might not, some institutions might call it M&E, some might have a different way, but being able to analyze data, measure impact and results is extremely important for all of those institutions. And there's a real need for experts with those skills. But you just might want to talk about it a little bit differently than maybe you have within the US government context.
Anyone else want to jump in on this theme? Monitoring and evaluation has come up a lot, as has people who are working in the humanitarian space. That's a space that's getting hit particularly hard right now, both BHA at USAID, but also across the UN system because it's so dependent on US government funding. So the humanitarian space is undergoing major change right now. What do you do if that's the place you're coming from? If your area of focus is really specifically being targeted at the moment? Any thoughts for those folks? I know it's a hard one. All right, we'll table that. Go ahead, Gayle. Go ahead, Gayle. You're muted. Gayle, you're muted, but we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, I've only done 75,000 Zooms in my life. Apologies. Local and state governments. I think one of the things we're going to see is a reduction in federal support for disaster and crisis response, and therefore a greater amount of pressure on state and local governments. And so I would think about looking at state and local government. And the advantage you have there is you've served the federal government, so you go in with a certain set of skills. So that's one place I would look.
And I also,
Great
I
point.
want to echo something that Zaid said earlier, which is that on the humanitarian, disaster relief, conflict specialists, although I think some of them might be thinking, how transferable are those skills? They're very sort of specific
Hugely.
individual areas, but that is talking about getting shit done. That's what, all of those people have shown their ability to kind of cut through really, really difficult situations and get things done. So part of this, again, is how you frame your skills as not just hey, I'm someone who does humanitarian relief or I'm someone who does post-conflict assistance, but I'm just someone who takes really difficult, knotty, complex, wicked problems and figures out a way to get things done and have impact on the ground. That's a very valuable set of skills. I worked a lot in conflict countries, and when I went to look at even in new sectors, by just talking through those skills and what I can bring through those skills was very attractive to a lot of people because that's what they're looking for, people who can get stuff done.
Yeah, it's a great point. And this whole idea of reframing, which has been a theme through the whole conversation, I think of a company like Starbucks as a global development company, right? You go into the coffee shop, the coffee of the day is from Rwanda, or it's from Ethiopia, or from Guatemala. They have to work with small scale farmers, often through local NGOs. They got to make sure that there aren't kids working on those fields. They have to make sure there's sustainable water resources. So there is a lot of private sector engagement on the very issues many of you coming from, let's say, the ag space, which has been mentioned in the chat, have a lot of experience with. We're just down to about 5 minutes left in our conversation. The chat has been enormously useful. Lots of interesting ideas in there. So we are going to make that content available to all of you. And I just want to open it back up to our panel to just get a final thought from each of you as we get toward the end of the conversation. Maybe Scott, I can start with you.
Sure. It is okay to be fearful. It is okay to be scared. It is not okay to let that paralyze you for more than a night. You need to be confident. You need to reach out for help. And you need to know that there are many opportunities out there for you. They're not necessarily going to knock on your door, but if you knock on someone else's door, some of those doors will eventually open. And if I can help, please let me know.
And the beauty of that, Scott, that mindset is the more conversations you have, the more doors you're knocking on, the more you're going to come up with ideas you never thought of, that other people are going to have thought of for you. So don't feel like, well, this is the path I'm going down. I can only talk to people in this space. Broaden that out as much as you can. Maybe a final thought from you, Zaid?
Yeah, two things really quickly. One, if you're an American citizen, you've paid into unemployment. If you need it, if you need to access it, you should. You should not feel bad about doing that. It is yours and it is there to help. It's not a lot of money, but it's more than zero. Apply for it. Second thing, talk to your partners and your spouses. It can be very uncomfortable. Like they might be like, why aren't you applying for more jobs? And you're like, oh, I am applying for jobs, but you haven't told them. And it's very stressful. It can be very stressful on your relationship. So make sure you're communicating with your partners about everything in this space.
Really useful advice. Thanks. Joel, maybe a final thought from you?
Well, what I would say is while you're investing in yourselves and while you're thinking about how to retool what new skills or how to think about the transferable skills, and that is obviously going to be must be a focus for you over the coming weeks and months. Continue to invest in the collective and the pushback, because what concerns me is that just there's not enough pushback. There's not enough stories, and Devex, I really congratulate you to get the word out, because what worries me most is there's not enough of a counter reaction. There's not enough of a response to show the work that you all have been doing, how extraordinarily valuable it is, how critical it is to the U.S. role in the world to continue to do that. And while it seems now like it might be shouting in the wind, it is not. It is absolutely essential that we keep doing it, and your skills are absolutely essential to doing it.
Thanks so much, Joel. Great thoughts. Fatema, to you.
You all inspired me. I put the link in the chat and I think Devex will share it as well. But I did write an article for all of you if it's helpful to think about what this career transition, summarizing some of these things that we've talked about here as well. I focus on one thing. I've designed these 2 career wheels of impact, if it's helpful as a framework of how to think through more concrete ways to think about where you want to be next. Focusing on where to have impact and how to have impact. The link is in the chat and I'll share it online as well. But just to say that, here's the irony of this moment, that this is a community. Someone wrote it in the chat. This is a fierce community. I love that. This is a fierce community. We're not silent. We're not doormats. We work on resilience all around the world. And the beauty of that, by the way, is that we are resilient. You are resilient. And that has been your life's mission and your life's work for communities all around the world. Now it's going to be something that we're going to individualize for some time, for a moment, but we're going to come back, and we're going to come back fiercer than ever. And so this is not an ending of your journey. This is a transition moment, and those transitions are going to have next chapters that make us stronger than ever, and you're going to be part of that. So don't lose hope even during these moments when it feels so raw. You're not alone. We're here, and you're so resilient, and we're gonna be fierce together for the long run.
Thank you so much, Fatema. Really important sentiment. Kate, a quick thought from you, and then I'm going to go to Gayle to close this out.
Yeah, 2 of our values here at Devex are we champion global development professionals and we feel urgency. And I think those are 2 values that our entire global team is putting into practice. From our reporters, they're unpacking what this all means, to putting together events like this, to the career and job resources. So just to let you know, we're here with you. There'll be many more things like this to come, a lot more content to come. Please let us know what more you need to know. And, we're here to help navigate you through this.
And Gayle, I'd love your final thoughts.
Yeah, just a couple things. One, to build on what Kate just said, get Devex the feedback on what's the most helpful to you. Because again, this is the start of a process and we want to be responsive to and supportive of you all. Also, just to this notion of pushback. We're not where we need to be yet, but I have to say we are steadily in the press. USAID has gotten more coverage in the last 2 weeks than in any time I can remember. The vast bulk of it is positive. It's stories about what you all do in the field in Washington on the ground, what it achieves for the country. Remember that most Americans, even in current polling, support foreign assistance and support what you do. So I think one of the things that's important is getting those stories out. We are all working to do that here, not just in Washington, but at the state level, because what we're starting to see is, again, states are recognizing it has impact on them, and there are people across every state in the union that support you in what you do. So the more we can elevate those voices and create the echo chamber, the more we can try to move forward in the right direction on this.
Well, I've got to
And
say,
we won't stop till we do, quite frankly.
I got to say just an enormous thank you to this incredible panel. Thank you all for dropping everything to be part of this event. We called it a career emergency event because it is. It's a real emergency for people. But it feels so much better to be doing this together than to be doing it alone. This is our mission at Devex. We're here to support you. We're going to keep at it. And we really appreciate the situation you're in and what you're doing to get through it together, and the impact that everybody here wants to have on the world. The impact you all dedicated your whole careers to will continue. Thank you so much for being here.